Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second session of our online conference on human rights and literature. My name is Seray, and I'm a research assistant at Istanbul Topkapı University. I want to extend a warm greeting to all our guests, speakers, and participants joining us from different parts of the world. Now I will introduce you to our first speaker, Dr. Hilal ŞENGENÇ. And Dr. Hilal ŞENGENÇ is an instructor of English at Ege University School of Foreign Languages. She holds a MA degree in American Culture and Literature from 9 Eylül University and a PhD degree in English Language and Literature from Ege University. Her research interests include contemporary British and American fiction, African American literature, comparative literature, contemporary Turkish literature, postcolonial studies, identity, and trauma theory. She will present her paper titled To Remember or Not to Remember, Trauma of Slavery in Fred Daguerre's The Longest Memory. I'll hand this virtual floor over to Dr. Hilal ŞENGENÇ. Just a second, I will unmute you. Yeah.
I forget to turn on my voice. Thank you very much for this opportunity for presentations. I hope it will be another great session. I would like to begin. May I share my screen?
Yes, now you can.
I'm not very good at using Zoom, so sorry beforehand if there are some errors due to technical problems. Yeah. Okay. And yes, as you mentioned earlier, the title of my presentation is To Remember or Not to Remember, Trauma of Slavery in Fred Daguerre's The Longest Memory. The aftermath of the Triangular Middle Passage, slavery has been dismissed from the historical archive of the white European American culture. The injustice regarding the subjugation of the blacks is challenged, and their silence is compensated by transatlantic authors whose works functions as sites of memory, where imagination and fact come together so that the blanks within the slave narratives can be filled, in Morrison's definition. Guyanese British novelist Fred Daguerre's The Longest Memory revisits African slave enslavement on the late 18th Virginian plantation and retells it as an unjust experience via the witnessing of the black protagonist, Whitechapel. The oldest slave saying enough for one life, several life, Whitechapel is traumatized due to surviving his son Chapel's death by the overseer, who considers the sentence of public whipping intimidating for other would-be runaway slaves. Whitechapel's remaining days are stamped by his trauma of losing his son, a condition to which he reacts in two contradictory ways, that is, remembering and forgetting. He is a witness, thus both are necessary for him to overcome his trauma. This paper reads The Longest Memory as a testimony to the trauma of slavery, whose ghost lingers around even today and still ruins the lives of many black people. Therefore, it foregrounds the significance of literature in fighting back violations of human rights. Erikson suggests that trauma can be defined as an injurious blow to the body and the mind. When the classical symptoms like anxiety and detachment are considered, it describes the personal perception of an injury rather than the blow itself. These symptoms possess and make a person constantly relive the wounding experience in daydreams and nightmares, flashbacks, and hallucinations. Because trauma is the harm from which people suffer, how they react to it might become a persistent mental state developing a sense of difference. This subjective response, Katie Carrot notes, emerging belatedly, depicts trauma's historical characteristics, for it becomes a tool connecting one to his past. Psychic disorders, namely personal reaction to traumatizing events, were summarized as post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is overwhelming since it deprives the experiencer of the ability to handle it. The person who is suffering from PTSD is traumatized because of being possessed by the event, which returns against his will, again in Carrot's definition. It is not comprehended when it occurs, but it is experienced only during its delayed, repetitive occurrences. The returning traumatic event is an indication of an attempt to master what was never fully grasped in the first place, that is, to overcome this lack of direct experience or the threat of the dead in the past. So, as Carrot suggests, it is necessary to view survival from a tragic experience as traumatic. In the light of Carrot's alignment of trauma and literature, and from a post-colonial literary perspective, the experience of African slavery can be evaluated as a symptom of PTSD. Africa's perspective is ignored in the accounts of official history written by the white. The African is placed in the center and given voice to tell his own story by contemporary writers like Deguar, a member of the non-migrant second generation of Black Britons. The compensation of the absent African voice via narrative agency is linked with literature's ethical potential, for it enables a dismantling of the authority of official record. When slavery is retold from the position of the subjugated, and its trauma is integrated into literary and historical archive, it performs as an individual and political challenge. Transatlantic writers address slavery in two ways: counterfactualism and ontological perspective. Counterfactualism perceives history hypothetically and claims that the wrongs of the past can be recognized and amended when history is written again. On the other hand, ontological perspective asserts the continuation of the past within the present. It deems time as an unending phenomenon and uses possession to signify the institution of racialized slavery as a signal of the wicked clashing with the good in human beings. The longest memory includes both perspectives. The novel depicts African enslavement as a historically perpetual, culturally significant, and socially consequential incident. As an example of the genre of neo-slave narrative with its alternative representation of slavery, it belongs to the historical record called the Neo-Archive. The novel consists of multiple points of view. Besides the whites, who express their opinions of the institution, and some paratexts such as diaries, letters exchanged between slaves and their owners, newspaper articles regarding slaveholding, which provide a realistic picture of the 18th century plantation slavery, Black characters like Whitechapel, Cook, and Whitechapel's great-granddaughter tell their own stories of enslavement, where the tracks of Africans' trauma of slavery become visible and audible. As the most senior slave on the plantation, Whitechapel believes in the necessity of being submissive to have a good, long life. Contrary to his father, young Chapel has aspirations to become free, leading him to make plans with Miss Lydia, the master's daughter, who teaches him to write and read secretly, to run away to the north. The conflict between the father and the son about the place of a slave in life will be resolved, since Chapel never pays heed to the father's warnings, and Whitechapel fails in the son's schooling in the idea of subservience. As it's transferred by the great-granddaughter, the reason for Whitechapel's obedience is his being a victim of the transatlantic slave trade that expels him from Africa. Reminding him of the past, he claims that Africa turns into a poisonous dream that evokes insolence on the plantation. To fend off the trouble and persist, he forgets, never talks about Africa, and advises his progeny to make their dream here. It is also conveyed by the wife, the cook, by his wife, the cook, that his endeavors to do all the proper things entitles him to be called an example of the slave, earning him not only the longest life on the plantation, but also the master and overseer's respect. Hence, he divides slaves into two groups: the ones experiencing everything themselves, and the others learning through observation.
Dr. ŞENGENÇ, sorry for interrupting. If you have changed the slide, we were unable to see it. We're still seeing the first.
Yes, so it is in the first one, and the next is coming when I have some extracts from the novel.
Excuse me then, I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. Thank you for the warning, however. So how can I? Okay. Hence, so there are two, according to Whitechapel, there are two there's a practical way of dividing slaves into two categories: the ones who experience everything themselves, and the others learning through observation. So while the first is a troublemaker, the second is clever, less disturbing, thus lives longer, because he realizes that Chapel, his son, belongs to the first group. He discloses his son's whereabouts on the way to the north to the master, with an intention to save him from the horrible fate he might bring on himself. And if I can share, there is my second slide on the screen. Is it visible now?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for confirmation. However, with Chapel's death, the longest living slave is revisited by the longest nightmare he has strived so hard to disclaim, hoping that the overseer would not beat his half-brother to death, because Chapel is the overseer's, unfortunately, half-brother, and that Chapel would benefit from some punishment which might banish any thoughts of freedom from his mind. Whitechapel, the father, feels remorse as a result of his failing judgment and complicity in his son's murder. And as a result, he suffers from PTSD because he is haunted by the memory of the incident. So in this extract, the details are very horrible, I guess. For Whitechapel, being guilty and bearing witness to the torture Chapel has undergone without being able to do anything but watching is an unbearable burden. Okay, and since his son's death, Whitechapel has cried uncontrollably and has been frozen, which is his traumatic reaction. Without any traces of past happiness or prospect of future content, his face turns into a side of memory that reflects his endless shame, anger, and grief. Because of his guilt, he no more cries, he no more talks, just sits sullenly, and therefore he is called Soreface. Whitechapel gets stuck in his mourning as he cannot work through his son's loss, which is the evidence of 300 years, that is the black storm of slavery. Okay. Therefore, as a survivor of the slave trade and plantation slavery who fails in overcoming his trauma, forgetting is the only way to cease his pain. Although Whitechapel tends to forget as a response to being haunted by the past, he is also the witness whose awareness of the necessity to tell urges him to remember, no matter how painful it is. He has too much to say, which have soared in his mouth, and, like a poison, has turned him into a ghost that is seen and ignored by all family members due to killing his only son. And this is his other reaction, remembering. He claims that this mortal isolation might be terminated and his soul might rest if its cause is revealed. In conclusion, neither the injustice of slavery can be compensated or the blacks can be purged of its painful memory that tries to resurrect itself. However, it might be grasped when its trauma is transferred, which helps bring forth some healing for the victims. This relates to Deguar's archival attitude that underlies his works, where history intermingles with fiction. So the final slide is on Fred Deguar, on slavery. In an interview with Maria Frias, he points out the urgency of having more testimonies about the past in order to be better informed, for he considers slavery a source of knowledge and insight about the past and the present. He believes in the curative effect of fiction, thus keeps testifying so that this injustice is no more repeated. Okay, so this is the end of my presentation.
Dr. ŞENGENÇ, thank you so much for your insightful presentation. I would like to turn to our audience. Does anyone have any questions or comments? You can either unmute yourself or you can type on the chat box and I can read it for you. Okay. Thank you, Dr. ŞENGENÇ. It was an excellent addition to our conference.
Thank you very much.
Our next presenter is Afnan Hussain KOTTATHODIKA from Central European University. He holds bachelor's and master's in English literature from the University of Delhi and University of Hyderabad, respectively. His research interests focus around cultural studies, literary theory, human rights in literature, and citizenship studies. He has presented papers in multiple conferences, including American Comparative Literature Association, and also translated a dictionary on Malabar martyrs. Mr. Afnan Hussain KOTTATHODIKA.
Yeah, hello. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you for this conference. And let me just share the screen.
Just a second. Yes. Yes, now you can share your screen.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Let me start. So my paper is titled From Inmates to Storytellers, Prison Narratives as Human Rights Literature, specifically in Indian context. So in the abstract, I was planning to look at two texts, but due to time limitation of the presentation, I've just limited to analyzing one prison memoir. So the introduction, testimonials, human rights narratives. So testimonial literature attempts to record the first-person narratives of discrimination and oppression written by individuals who also act as witnesses to collective trauma and struggle of their communities. The term comes from the word testimonio, a genre originated in Latin America, which focuses on witnessing and foregrounds the critique of oppressive regimes. Testimonials are also human rights narratives portraying trauma, resistance, and survival mechanism of various oppressed classes and communities. So the question is, are these life stories effective in advancing human rights? For Margareta Joly, the life story as a human rights story cries out for emotional recognition and mourning, the compensation of public remembrance and education. They're not only mere narratives of suffering, rather, they are also protest stories because quite often they also involve motives of resolution and triumph. There's been a lot of criticism on whether it is possible to consider the testimonies as authentic narratives in judicial processes. However, withstanding this criticism, many scholars have also reiterated the moral implications of life narratives. For example, Diana Mays argued that victim stories contribute to building a culture of human rights, and a moral commitment to human rights can be cultivated through an empathetic engagement with these narratives. For Kavita Punjabi, a scholar from India, the real issues underlying the criticism of the testimonial as a genre is not about authenticity or veracity or even literalness. Rather, the testimonial has come under attack because it raises uncomfortable questions about injustices and inequalities that are deep-rooted in our societies. So storytelling. So this is one method. Storytelling or narrating one's own experiences, which is part of the larger cultural discourse, is also a method to invite ethical response and empathy from the reader, and they point to how discrimination takes place. While Professor James Davis maintains that human rights work is at its heart a matter of storytelling, scholars like Kay Schaffer and Sidoni Smith write that stories also invite an ethical response from listeners and readers. Hence, telling and listening to stories of suffering, it forms the corpus of human rights literature. Now, I move to the life writing in Indian context, and my question is a Muslim testimonial possible? Withstanding the criticism of testimonial, Professor Pramod K. Nair conceptualizes Dalit life writing. Dalit is a group of lower caste people from India who were historically oppressed. So he analyzes Dalit life writing and women's life writing in Indian context as testimonial and atrocity narratives. He discusses seminal text, Bama's Karukul, to argue that autobiography as a term is inadequate to capture Dalit life writing because they portray the atrocities committed upon a large social group and are narratives of trauma, pain, resistance, protest, and social change. So if we consider Dalit life writing as speaking for a collective and not as a personal account, how do we analyze the Muslim life writing in India in this particular context? For that, I need to delve into a little bit of the political context in India. Unjust incarceration of Muslim individuals is a pressing issue. So as you can see in this slide, the construction of Muslim mother in the post-colonial Indian state through print and digital media, Bollywood, political campaigns, etc. So this discourse has been already there in the sociology and anthropology of religion, where I've referred to some scholars. So the unjust incarceration of Muslim individuals is a pressing issue in the post-colonial Indian politics, and the state and the police force uses various methods to create a politics of fear amongst the Muslim mass in India. Concomitant with the global war on terror discourse and guided by the homegrown hatred towards the Muslim other perpetrated by Hindutva, a radicalized group, Muslims in India have been persecuted under fabricated terrorism charges since the past 3 decades. National Crime Records Bureau report shows that despite comprising only 14% of the population, Muslims account for more than 30% of the total prisoners in India. So many of them are falsely fabricated for terror cases like UAPA and PTA is like POTA, NSA, etc. and languish in jail without a fair trial for years. So although Muslims as a religious minority have been going through extreme discrimination and oppression by the state and majoritarian groups, we see a dearth of documentation of the same, and even those which have come out receive scant scholarly attention. So here I analyze this one text written by, so there are very few texts which have come out as prison memoirs from the Muslim under trial prisoners. So I analyze the narrative of Framed as a Terrorist, a prison memoir against this political and cultural context. It is a terrific account of how Muhammad Amir Khan, a 20-year-old Muslim youth hailing from the bylanes of Old Delhi, was kidnapped by the police, fabricated in 19 bomb blast cases, and had to spend 14 years in jail before proving his innocence. In the text, rather than only detailing the inhumane treatment and harsh realities of Indian prisons, the narrator uses his language to create multiple selves, placing himself as a son to his parents, a lover, a father to his daughter, etc. He delegitimizes the state or official narratives about him as a dreaded terrorist on the one hand and about the community on the other. So in a nutshell, through a narrative strategy that includes trauma writing and performance, the text generates political roles for the narrator as a primary witness. The narrative was written after he was freed from jail with the help of a human rights activist named Nandita Haksar, and it works as what Pramod K. Nair calls a staging. The staging is the site of dialogue, of intercultural exchange, where the possibilities of a program of emancipation can emerge in the nexus between the Muslim protagonist and the non-Muslim editor or translator or activist. The staging also invites readers to participate in the narrative's social agenda, thereby making the present life writing of Muslims a collaboration between the reader and the protagonist of a global readership. The narrator passionately, so in the narrative, he invokes the secular fabric of Indian nation in the beginning itself. He says, the midwife was a Christian nun who had been there when my elder sister was born. She is the first person who held me. This invocation is of particular importance here because he reminisces a beautiful past where people of all religions could freely engage with each other, a reality that would change drastically in the following years. The specter of partition of India, which happened in 1947, it comes into the narrative in the following pages. Although the discourse around disloyal Muslim citizens who had allegiance to Pakistan reverberated in the Indian political and cultural sphere, until 1990s, visiting relatives in Pakistan was a normal affair in the social life of Indians. Amir's own sister, Chaman Ara, was married to a Pakistani, and in those days, many relatives and neighbors went to visit their loved ones in Pakistan. It was quite a normal part of life in the old Delhi. But when Amir turned 20, he also wanted to go to Pakistan and visit his sister, and he was so excited about the journey. And he says, Pakistan was as foreign a country as Germany, except that in Pakistan, they spoke the same language. Unfortunately, this trip to Pakistan would cost an imprisonment of 14 years in his life, as traveling to Pakistan or any relationship with Pakistan figures well into the fictitious narratives of police, judicial institutions in India about Muslims and terrorism. As Amir notes, his interrogators repeatedly asked him while he was in jail whether he got training with the Pakistan intelligence services, the Indus Services Intelligence. Although the narrative describes his childhood as a peaceful one, if we look deeper, if we delve into deeper, we see a dysfunctional childhood. Childhood in the sense, as Joseph Slaughter is using it, of Muslim children in the colonies of North India, including the capital city of Delhi. He says, Ammi and Abu, my father and mother, were always telling me to be home before dark. There were some days I remember I was not allowed to go out at all. Abu said there was some trouble in the city and it was safer if we stayed indoors. I remember he mentioned words such as curfew, riots, police firing, etc. The discourse around Islamic terrorism imagines Muslim colonies as a dangerous space inhabited by potential terrorists, but the narrator offers a different narrative of Muslim presence there as simple human beings who struggle to meet their ends, share joy and laughter, and their interfaith harmony among the locals. As the narrative proceeds forward, we see Amir is growing conscious about his religious identity in a majoritarian state, especially during his interrogation. It is a common practice that interrogators use racially abusive slurs to destabilize prisoners mentally. Slurs like mullah, katwa, bully, these are like Hindi, Urdu terms, which are used in the case of Muslim prisoners. As Devika Bodia argues, the police force in India does not initiate violence because they just have impunity. Instead, Hindu nationalism imparts a political consciousness that urges the police to commit violence in the service of Hindu nation. So he said, one of the policemen in Amir's interrogation shouted Jai, and the rest answered Bajrang Bali Ki. It was as if they were going to a war. In the jail, he was also attacked by policemen and wardens who shouted, beat the bastard, traitor to the country. Amir talks about how the opportunity to take up his studies inside the jail helped him keep his sanity. He passed BPP and enrolled for BA courses, and he describes how he felt entering the library. Prisoners were supposed to squat on the ground all the time, but inside the library, he could sit on a chair. He says, I suddenly felt the simple act of sitting on a chair had restored some of my dignity and self-respect. After I was released from jail, one of the first things I did was to buy 4 chairs so that I could sit with dignity and speak to my guests. Then he makes references to Alia, a relative whom he had affection, and refashions himself as a passionate lover, as opposed to the figure of a dehumanized terrorist that the police have given him. He imagines and finds dignity in a new self, and it reflects in his following words. From being portrayed as a dangerous terrorist, I was being looked upon as a victim of a system which discriminated against Muslims. His narrative reconstructs selfhood and agency, as Mayes argues, and he says that I was being recognized as a survivor, a human being who had suffered so much and yet had come out of it without losing my humanity. Went a long way towards making me feel a part of society again. Incarceration turned his self in such a way that the time in jail had made me a braver person. And he realized that he had, I got, inborn capacity to remain positive. He also talks for his community, I got. The neighbors greeted me and felt proud that our defamed neighborhood had proved it was not a base of terrorism. Active involvement with legal procedures and court trials and constant engagement with legal language, the legalist, offers conceptual spaces in which new forms of life come into being, as Mayur Siddish argues in the terrorism cases from New Delhi. So from an ordinary youth from the violence of Old Delhi, Amir presents himself as somebody who's aware of legal mechanisms. He says, I knew my rights by now, but it seemed that the attender had no idea about these rules. He extends his hope and support for others as well. He says, I help people who came with their cases to Unheard, an organization that is working for human rights of prisoners. So by this, I like to conclude the chapter. We see that Muhammad Amir Khan's testimonial narrative shifts away from the usual trope of sentimentality in prison memoirs, where only suffering is detailed. And it offers a new language in which he talks back to the state, where he imagines human rights in he presents a new human rights imagination. Although he's hopeful, the pain of a father who is aware of the political turmoil in his country, the present situation in India, can be seen in this narrative. He asks, what does the future hold for my daughter? I want her to study. I would like her to devote her life to fighting against injustice, and her education should help her understand the world around her. Amir also had provided photographs of his family, the programs in which he was invited to speak in the final pages of the book. He gives this as appendix. So those pictures also speak for what he's tried to get through the narrative, an attempt to place the wrongly incarcerated Muslim in India as a human being with dignity, with love and hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Mr. KOTTATHODIKA. Does anyone have any questions or comments? All right, thank you. Our next presenter is Dr. Ezgi GAGA. Ezgi GAGA received her bachelor's in English language and literature from Ege University, master's in translation studies from Istanbul University, and PhD in interlingual and intercultural translation studies from Yıldız Technical University. She's currently continuing her academic studies at Istanbul Topkapı University. Her presentation is titled Translation as a Human Right. Dr. GAGA, you have the floor.
Thank you, Seray. Can I share my screen? Now
yes.
I cannot.
Just a minute.
All right.
Now you can.
Okay. Can you see now? Is it okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Are the slides passing?
Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, hello, good afternoon again. I'm going to talk about translation as a human right today. Actually, I'm taking the issue of human rights from a different perspective. I take it in the framework of translation practice. So it's a bit different from literature, but I hope you like it. So let me go on. So translation as a human right, the importance of communication and exchange of ideas across linguistic and cultural barriers cannot be overstated. So for many individuals and communities around the world, the language barriers can pose significant challenges to their ability to participate fully in society, access information, and exercise their human rights. So translation has emerged as an essential human right due to the crucial role it plays in facilitating communication and promoting access to information and ideas across linguistic and cultural barriers. So the recognition of translation as a human right actually has its roots in the right to freedom of expression, and it is stated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international human rights frameworks. So the right to freedom of expression includes the right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any medium, regardless of frontiers, and the right to use one's language. So as a result, the right to translation has emerged as an essential human right, and it is recognized by both international human rights law and discourse. So this study actually aims to explore the legal and ethical dimensions of translation as a human right, and it examines the ways in which translation is necessary for the protection of linguistic and cultural diversity, as well as for the promotion of social, economic, and political rights. And also it argues that the right to translation should be seen as an essential element of human rights discourse, and efforts should be made to ensure that all individuals have access to high-quality translation services in order to fully exercise their human rights. So in this framework, I'm going to talk about firstly the legal and ethical dimension of translation as a human right. Then I will talk about the economic and social dimensions of translation as a human right. And I will talk about the main challenges and the limitations. And finally, I will talk about what efforts could be made. From the legal dimension, the right to translation is recognized in international human rights law, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In Article 27 of the ICCPR stipulates that the individuals have the right to enjoy their own culture, to profess and practice their own religion, and to use their own language. And this includes right to access information and services in one's own language, and it's of course require translation. And the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples also recognizes the right of indigenous people to use and revitalize their own language, and it may require translation services for sure. And from an ethical dimension, translation can have ethical implication in terms of accuracy, impartiality, and respect for cultural differences. So the translators have responsibility to accurately convey the meaning and intent of the source text without adding their own biases and interpretation. They also have responsibility to respect the cultural context of the text and avoid cultural stereotypes and assumptions. For example, in legal context, accurate translation can be critical to ensure that individuals receive a fair trial regardless of their language proficiency. And the question is, why is the right to translation an essential component of the right to freedom of expression and the right to participate fully in society? And the answer is, if the individuals are unable to understand information in a language they do not speak, they are effectively denied this right. So the translation can help ensure that individuals have access to information and ideas, regardless of the language which they are presented. And for example, the provision of translation services can also be critical, that individuals have access to legal documents, public information, and media in languages other than the dominant language. So for the right to participate fully in society, translation surely help individual to able to access essential services such as healthcare, education, and legal representation in their own language. And it can also facilitate participation in political processes such as voting, advocacy, by ensuring that individuals have access to information and resources in their language. From social dimension, the right to translation has also some implication in terms of facilitating social inclusion and promoting cross-cultural understanding and preserving linguistic and cultural diversity. Maybe in many countries, healthcare providers are required to provide interpretation services to patients who do not speak the language of healthcare provider. However, the cost of hiring interpreters and using interpretation equipment can be very significant, especially in areas with high demand for translation services. Again, from an economical dimension, the cost of translation services can be a barrier for individuals who may not have the financial resources to access them. For example, in some cases, governments may be obligated to provide translation services, but it cannot be possible sometimes. So also in legal proceedings in many countries, individuals who do not speak the official language of the court may have right to court appointed interpreter. However, it costs a lot, you may know, and it can be very high. In some cases, the burden may fall on the individual to pay for an interpreter themselves. So this can be a significant barrier again. And again, from an educational perspective, the cost of translation services can be high in order to access education. And however, the interpreters and providing translated materials can be very high in terms of cost. So again, for governmental services, in many countries, government agencies are required to provide translation services to individuals who do not speak the official language. Again, the cost of providing such services can be high, especially in areas with a high demand for translation. And in terms of protection of linguistic and cultural diversity, the right to translation is also important for protection of these values. You know, the language is a fundamental part of cultural identity, and the loss of language can have significant negative impacts on individuals and communities. And translation can help preserve linguistic and cultural diversity by facilitating communication between different language communities and promoting cross-cultural understanding. And translation is also essential for preserving and promoting indigenous languages, many of which are at risk of dying out. So by translating materials, especially in literature, into indigenous languages, these languages continue to be spoken and their cultural heritage is preserved. And there are many challenges and limitations, you may know. The first is accessing the translation services. In many countries, minority language speakers face this. And for example, in some indigenous communities as Canada, there are not enough trained translators available to translate important documents such as legal documents or health information into indigenous languages. As a result, these members may not have access to important information and which can impact their ability to participate fully in society. And the second challenge is quality, ensuring the quality translation. It can be particularly challenging, especially in specialized fields such as legal or medical translation. And for example, in the United States, court interpreters may not have the necessary training or certification to provide accurate legal translation services. And it can lead to misunderstandings or even wrongful convictions. And also in medical field, inaccurate translation of medical information can result in misdiagnosis or inappropriate treatment, and it can have serious consequences for patients. In terms of funding, we talked about the cost again. The cost of providing translation services can be a significant barrier. For example, in the European Union, there are 24 official languages, and they provide translation services for all languages, but it can be prohibitively expensive. As a result, these translation services may be limited, which can result in unequal access to translation services. And the other challenge is political and social barriers. You know, in some contexts, there may be political or social resistance to provide translation services, particularly for minority languages or cultures. For example, in some regions of China, the government has discouraged deliberately the use of minority languages in schools and public institutions, and it can limit access to translation services, and it perpetuates inequalities. And similarly, in some countries, there may be resistance to provide translation services for refugees or migrants, and it can result in limited access to important information and services. In Turkey case, Turkey, is a diverse country with many minority languages and cultures, and ensuring the right to translation for all communities remains still a significant challenge. There have been some steps taken to recognize and support minority language rights in recent years, but I believe there is still a long way to go to ensure that all communities in Turkey have equal access to translation services and can fully participate in society. If we look at the challenges in Turkey, the first challenge is, again, the limited funding for translation and interpretation services. And despite some government support for translation and interpretation service, there's still a limited funding available to ensure minority language speakers have access to these services in terms of accessing healthcare, legal services, and other important services. The second challenge in Turkey is the shortage of qualified interpreters and translators. There is a shortage of qualified experts, translation experts who are proficient in minority languages in Turkey, and this can result in low quality translations or a lack of translation services together. And the next challenge in Turkey and discrimination and marginalization. It is still minority language speakers in Turkey continue to face discrimination and marginalization, and it can make it difficult for them to participate fully in society, and it can also limit their access to education, employment, and other opportunities. And the next one is limited access to education in their mother tongue. There are some steps taken, but still many minority language speakers do not have access to education in their mother tongue, and it can make it difficult for them to fully participate in society, and it can also lead to loss of cultural and linguistic heritage. And the next, limited recognition of minority rights. Again, there are some legal reforms, but there is still limited recognition of minority language rights in Turkey, and this can make it difficult for minority language speakers to assert their rights, and it can lead to a lack of access to services and information in their mother tongue. And what efforts to be made and to ensure that all individuals have access to high quality translation services in order to fully exercise their human rights? The first is to increase funding for language rights initiatives. So the governments and other organizations should increase funding for language rights initiatives such as translation and interpretation services. And next is to expand the use of technology, and technology can help to bridge language barriers and provide access to high quality translation services. So the governments and organizations should invest in technology such as translation software and video conferencing tools. And the next is to develop qualified interpreters and translators. There are some legal reforms, but there is still a limited recognition. So this can make it difficult for minority language speakers to assert their rights, and it can lead access to information and in their mother tongue. I'm sorry, I'm just passing. And we are just talking about the next effort to raise awareness about language rights. So the governments and civil society organizations and other stakeholders should work together to raise awareness about language rights and importance of translation services to ensure that all individuals can fully exercise their human rights. And finally, to implement legal frameworks that protect language rights. So the governments should implement legal frameworks that protect language rights, such as the right to translation and interpretation in legal proceedings, especially. And this can help individuals to have access to important services, and they can fully participate in society regardless of their language background. So by implementing these efforts, we can help to ensure that all individuals have access to high quality translation services, and they can fully exercise their human rights. Thank you.
Ezgi GAGA, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. You have touched upon many important points.
You're welcome.
Anybody have any questions or comments? Thank you so much.
I have a question. Can I ask? So what is the process of recognizing qualifications and competencies of translators and interpreters in Turkey?
In Turkey, there are some frameworks created and implemented, but not enough actually. In 2002, there is a framework just covering the minority language rights that I know. And recently, for Roman culture and for Kurdish people, there are some frameworks just worked and they are implemented. But there is not enough progress happening. And there are some challenges about broadcasting in mother tongue for minority language speakers actually. And there's the thing I can surely say, there's still a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. So if someone wants to be a practicing translator or interpreter in Turkey, is there a kind of state exam or municipality exam or school exam? Is there any kind of document to confirm that they have the right competencies?
Actually, if a person just graduated from translation studies department or from English literature department, for example, they can practice translation in Turkey. There is not any certification progress, but it is just working on. There is a standard actually. There would be a standard coming, but for now. If a person graduated from language departments can do translation practice.
Mm-hmm. So that will be enough to verify. Okay, yes. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Professor Vesna Sojit, for your question. Anybody else who wants to ask a question or comment? Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ezgi GAGA. Our next presenter is Rıza ÇİMEN. Rıza ÇİMEN is working as an English lecturer at Middle East Technical University, where he's doing his PhD in English literature. He focuses on the intersection between posthumanism, theories of space, and contemporary British theater. His research interests include contemporary British theater, posthumanism, theories of the drama, ecopoetics, counter-memory, and genre theory. And Mr. Rıza ÇİMEN is going to present our paper titled Verbatim Theater Across Transposable Spaces, David Hare's The Permanent Way. Rıza ÇİMEN, you have the floor.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello again. Thank you for giving me this chance to share my ideas with you today. It's great to be sharing the moment with you. So my presentation is titled Verbatim Theater Across Transposable Spaces, David Hare's The Permanent Ways. I suppose I'm permitted to share my screen
yes,
right now? Yes. Okay. Now that we're all set. Sorry. Okay. So verbatim theater refers to a type of documentary drama that explores real events through testimonies of real people. First coined by David Paget in 1987 in an essay titled Verbatim Theater, Oral History and Documentary Techniques, this particular form of docu-theater focuses on the first-hand experiences of real people from diverse backgrounds, usually the minority groups and their undocumented stories that demand to be heard by the general public. Interviews constitute a large portion of the source materials in verbatim aesthetics in its attempts to voice a real historical situation and to generate a politically oriented, dramatic content. In this way, authentic quotations from real people are employed by playwrights to weave a dramatic world where facts and fiction are amalgamated through a political dramaturgy in order to raise awareness against the perils of ideologies like neoliberalism. Following this plane of thought, it could be argued that verbatim theater incorporates a series of what Rosi Braidotti calls transpositions, in-between spaces that are nonlinear but not chaotic, nomadic yet accountable and committed, creative but also cognitively valid, discursive and also materially embedded. Transpositions bear the potential to address the coexistence of multiplicities in terms of form, content, and subjectivities. And verbatim theater offers an aesthetic space where the mobility and cross-referencing between disciplines and discursive levels can find a creative medium for a materially instantiated theatrical imagination. David Hayer's The Permanent Way is a representative example of verbatim theater in which transposable spaces, that is, dramatic form, authentic testimonies, and theatrical imagination, coexist in a symbiotic interdependence and pose a radical challenge to the self-interests of Tory neoliberalism in Britain. Written in response to the privatization of railways, the play voices the concerns of those directly involved in the process and bears witness to how the public rights for transportation are violated for the interests of the ruling ideology. So before looking into how the play builds on the convergence between verbatim aesthetics and transpositions, it is first necessary to delineate the way this convergence takes place. The emergence of verbatim theater as a distinct methodology coincides with a period marked by a deep sense of distrust in the very notion of truth. As David Lane observes, verbatim theater grew in popularity across the millennium thanks to the public's increasing distrust of politicians, journalism, and respected organizations such as the BBC and the Metropolitan Police Force. So it is not difficult to identify the impetus behind this widespread lack of trust in truth-seeking institutions. One factor was the increasing politicization of public discourse in a manner fueled by Thatcherite neoliberalism, which in the end could only generate further rifts in the social consensus. Another factor was the so-called war on terror and the ensuing dispersal of clarity in matters of domestic security and international relations. With the turn of the century marked by the chaotic impulses brought about by such discordant issues, theatrical expression somehow began to assume a more serious identity than what traditional institutions like established journalism could offer while seeking truth at the time. In this context, theatrical explorations of truth in a wide range of forms and modes of expressions unlocked a considerable potential for integrating the unheard stories of those marginalized under the dominant discourse into the mainstream public awareness. Verbatim theater in this way emerged as an attempt to fill a gap in the social and political structure. However, as Harold Pinter once famously put it, truth in drama is forever elusive. In its search for finding a way to represent the real on stage, verbatim theater demonstrates a definitive take on truth as a traceable source that finds expressions through verbal testimonies. In this way, interviews form the basis for constituting a drama of ideas and emotions around a central subject matter. In one way, verbatim sensibility performs a worldwide civic function of sorts, creating a democratic theater that can document all four corners of the globe and give an opportunity for people to talk and be listened to. Interviews provide this chance to address multiple perspectives over the topic that the playwright or the theater company has chosen to explore. However, this is also where the relationship between the verbatim form and reality gets complicated. While the first-hand experiences of the interviewee provide an authentic source of inspiration for the constitution of meaning through verbatim aesthetics, ethical concerns over whether the final text can truly reflect the unmediated accounts about a particular issue need to be considered. After all, David Lane informs that a selection process is an important element in the making of a viable dramatic content with aesthetic and political value. Problematically, verbatim theater often carries a promise to present the unmediated truth, not merely a version, but the version of what occurred, a promise that it cannot hope to achieve. Moreover, David Lane says, a selection process is occurring even before the complete range of material is retrieved, because the conditions of retrieval may also influence its content. In verbatim plays, interviews are not objective. They present the truth as the interviewee perceives it and wants it to be heard. Interviews are also encounters with a question-answer structure. An agenda of discovery surrounding a chosen topic is set, casting the interviewee into a particular identity, figure of parliament or rail crash, victim or terrorist. And they select the content of their answer, rejecting or confirming that identity, while the interviewer responds in turn by selecting further questions to direct the interviewee. This is not simply to suggest that playwrights are cherry-picking the source materials to suit the dramatic output according to their agenda, but the fact that there is a selection process shows how a dramatic strategy that claims to build upon unmediated truth is in fact deeply imbricated with the imaginative technique of collage, which again hints that fictional dynamics are at work even when an art piece claims to work through the effects of verisimilitude. For this reason, verbatim theater could be taken as a compound of reality through testimonies and imagination via the aesthetic dynamics of collage. On another level, this imbrication of fact and fiction within a dramatic form implies that both categories have the potential to contain each other. In other words, verbatim theater points to a dramatic space where facts have theatrical potentials and fiction is able to address facts. Also, the premise that a play, whether verbatim or purely fictional, inevitably calls for an audience engagement with emotions hints at a similarity between the process of arranging verbatim material and the process of writing a fictional drama. Considering such fluidity between traditionally distinct categories across a dramatic form, it is possible to argue that verbatim theater incorporates transpositions. In her highly influential book, Transpositions on Nomadic Ethics, Rosie Braidotti explains the concept as an intertextual, cross-boundary, or transversal transfer in the sense of a leap from one code, field, or axis into another, not merely in the quantitative mode of plural multiplications, but rather in the qualitative sense of complex multiplicities. It is not just a matter of weaving together different strands, variations on a theme, but rather of playing the positivity of difference as a specific theme of its own. As a term in music, transposition indicates variations and shifts of scale in a discontinuous but harmonious pattern. It is thus created as an in-between space of zigzagging and of crossing. Entailing a combination of differences, transpositions thus address a leap from uniform, linear, and stable concepts into heterogeneous frameworks. Also, the notion of transposition describes the connection between the text and its social and historical context in the material and discursive sense of the term, connecting the discursive knowledge with material reality. Following this plane of thought, it is possible to argue that verbatim aesthetics offer a creative space for merging the real with the imaginary, which means that it reconsiders these concepts as transposable spaces where each category accommodates one another's qualitative distinctions, thereby pointing to the mutual interdependence between the two. In so doing, verbatim theater offers an alternative answer to the ethical questions that might arise in the discussion over what really constitutes the political value of dramatic work. By weaving together the diverse modalities that come from the explorations of fact and imagination, verbatim aesthetics inaugurates a material discursive approach to theater without succumbing the artistic venture into neither a fact-based economy of science nor an avant-garde hold on formal experimentation. David Hare's The Permanent Way can be considered as an example of verbatim theater that adopts this approach. Focusing on how Thatcherite neoliberalism put a stop to the public railway system, the play explores the human cost of capitalist greed and the government's incompetence in the wake of the privatization process. The Conservative administration decided to privatize the railways in 1991, just before an election they weren't expecting to win. This decision caused a heavy burden on the British taxpayers, who later on had to further subsidize the railway system. Moreover, following the privatization process, several fatal rail crashes took place around London, the worst of which killed 31 people and injured over 400 in Ladbroke Grove in 1999. In this sense, voicing the ethical concerns over the loss of fundamental human rights under a conservative regime, the play merges form and content to draw attention to the ethically problematic outcomes of economic decisions made by profit-driven political systems. In line with the argument that verbatim theater reworks facts and theatrical imagination as transposable spaces, the play seeks to maintain respect for the source material, that is the interviews, while also trying to generate a successful piece of drama. The text covers a diverse range of first-hand accounts coming from different people and perspectives, such as a high-powered treasury thinker, a senior rail executive, bereaved parents, passengers, lawyers, and a rail union leader. Each character voices the real material that was gathered by the playwright via an innumerable series of interviews. While bereaved parents, for example, express their grief over the loss of their loved ones, passengers complain about how the decision to privatize a public railway system cripples the lives of those that need the service most. It is revealed in the course of the play that no one other than the officials, investors, and politicians that profited from the privatization is happy with the outcomes. In this context, a wide range of emotions characterize the affective geography of the play, including anger, resentment, sadness, and loss. Juxtaposing the corporate greed of investors and executives with the tragic mourning of bereaved family members, the play points to the need for reconsidering the link between financial decisions and their outcomes in human lives. While doing this, facts and theatrical imagination are arranged with a purpose to reaffirm the reality of the tragedies that took place after the privatization of the railways. Real testimonies and dramatic dialogues function as transposable spaces where the violation of basic human rights find theatrical expressions. Therefore, the play ensures that the text faces up to the ethical responsibility of not inventing new material, as well as wields the imaginative power of theater to address reality in its diverse forms. Thank you for patiently listening to me.
Thank you so much, Mr. ÇİMEN, for your very insightful, informative presentation. Does anybody have any questions or comments? If not, let's take a 15 minutes of coffee break, and at 3:45 we can continue with the rest of the presentations. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome again. Our next presentation is a joint study by Dr. Sandhya, who is an assistant professor at Amrita Vishwa Vidyapeetham, and Sruthi Gupta, who is a research scholar at the same institution. Mrs. Gupta holds a bachelor's in English and master's in English literature from Central University of Karnataka, India. They will present their paper titled Interrogating the Paradox of Human Rights, the Questions of Precarity and Wrongs in Viparitam Opposite. I think Mrs. Gupta and Sandhya is not here yet. Am I correct?
Mrs. Gupta is here.
Gupta?
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yes, Mrs. Gupta, if you're ready.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
I will hand you this virtual floor if you're ready.
Thank you for the introduction. This is Sruthi Gupta. I'm a research scholar in English studies, Amrita Vishwa Vidyapeetham, India. I'm happy to be part of this conference. As already mentioned by the host, I have co-authored this paper with Dr. Sandhya, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Amrita. This paper, which is a part of larger research project, is titled Interrogating the Paradox of Human Rights, the Questions of Precarity and Wrongs in Viparidham Opposite. Without further ado, let me begin the presentation. Life writing attending to marginality in India has always engaged explicitly with the question of human rights pertaining to caste, gender, disability, class, and race. Viparidham, narrated by Raju and written by Unnikrishnan Avvala, narrates the life of Raju, an intersex person belonging to Aranadan tribal community in Kerala, a state in South India. It's a memoir written in Malayalam language and published in 2012. It accounts for Raju's realization of his intersex identity, his encounter with failed sex reassignment surgery, which worsened his misery and forcefully pushed him to take up begging for a livelihood. This only known testimony of an intersex person belonging to a tribal community in Kerala manifests structural violence through institutions like gender, caste, state, and medical institutions. The text exposes the paradox of human rights, but by unveiling the scarcity of human rights in the lives of subaltern people in the times of abundance of human rights in laws, policies, and discourses in India. Viparidham serves as an eye-opener, as a manifesto of crude violation of human rights faced by a tribal intersex person who occupies the periphery of already marginalized category within the queer movement and caste-based heteronormative and patriarchal society in India. This memoir reveals that Raju's lived experiences are characterized by precarity, which is considered as, I quote, a politically induced condition in which certain populations suffer from failing social and economic networks of support and become differentially exposed to injury, violence, and death. Judith Butler. Raju, a member of tribal caste, experienced his first menstrual cycle at the age of 18. He faced a great deal of loneliness and hardship after losing his mother at a very young age and being abandoned by his father, who also passed away later on. Being illiterate and not having attended school, Raju narrates this memoir, which was written by Unnikrishnan Avvala. To earn a living, he worked as a daily wage worker in restaurants. Raju shared the excruciating pain and discomfort he experienced during his menstrual cycle in this memoir. He also recalls the days when he felt so hopeless that he searched for poisonous berries in the forest to end his life, as his hut lacked a sturdy roof to hang himself. The social stigma and unawareness about a condition called intersex made him keep his condition in secrecy for many years without anyone noticing it. His circumstances of poverty, starvation, and economic insecurity forced him to take up jobs even on the days of unbearable pain. He reveals that he used to feel like ending his life during his menstrual days at the workplace when he has to conceal it from others by avoiding blood stains in his pants and survive the pain without compromising the work, mostly jobs that need physical labor assigned to him. His lived experiences at the intersection of multiple dimensions of precarity expose inadequacy of existing human rights paradigms. As asserted by Sundar Sarukai, lived experiences are the experiences over which the subject has no choice of whether to experience or not. The manifestation of multiple dimensions of precarity in the memoir illustrates Raju's unaffordable access to universal human rights based on cosmopolitan values. His lived experiences are shaped by interlocking and precarious intersections of tribal caste, intersex gender identity, corporal pain, poverty, illiteracy, trauma, and deprivation of secure spaces and amenities such as housing to safeguard himself from sexual exploitation and wild animal attack. The narration of these lived experiences in the memoir is fragmented and very selective. In the foreword to this memoir, Unnikrishna Nawala writes about Raju's anxiety and fear in opening up about the violations he had to undergo for the fear of death. To quote Raju's words, I quote, "Don't write that incident. They will beat me to death if I make it public," unquote. Upendra Bagchi constantly challenges the claims of human rights as universal by asserting the significance of context-sensitive nature of ideas of freedom, justice, and rights. Right-based movements that follow the cosmopolitan doctrine of human rights believe that all individuals are inherently entitled to certain rights simply because they are human beings, regardless of their affiliations. The reflection of LGBT right-based discourse motivated by universal human rights or other cosmopolitan values is evident in the queer politics scene in the mainstream society in the region. Raju, who belongs to intersex category, which is marginalized within the queer movement, doesn't own the caste capital to assert and claim his rights as a human. It fails to address the context-specific marginal spaces created by institutions such as caste within a particular specific socio-cultural milieu. As Datta points out, I quote, "While the process of claiming citizenship via liberal discourses of equal right visibilizes some LGBT subjects as deserving citizens, it might further entrench or reiterate extant social stigma against lower caste, class, groups, and subject positions," unquote. The significance of context-sensitive analysis of human rights demands contextualization of this memoir in its immediate socio-cultural economic location that hinders Raju from owning human rights as a resource to interpret his situatedness. Taking human rights seriously must involve taking human suffering seriously. Bagchi. The acknowledgement and validation of an individual's distress is highly dependent on the context and closely connected with how the socio-political and economic institutions operate. In Raju's case, legitimacy of his suffering is dependent on the intersection of his tribal caste and deviant gender identity. Raju's lived experiences are narrated in Viparidam, reveal that he is positioned in a marginal space where discrimination and oppression in the name of caste and gender find cultural legitimization. Like in institutions of caste, whose morality considers it justifiable. Raju is saddened by the fact that crying out loud would be futile as he wouldn't receive any assistance to resist sexual harassment from men, even if it's in public space. In the memoir, he discloses his decision to skip taking medicines meant for the growth of breasts, as he is sure that men will not leave him alone if he has breasts. Due to his economic situation, he is unable to afford a house with secure doors to protect him from perpetrators of sexual violence. As a result, he experiences constant insecurity and fear while residing in his makeshift hut, particularly after his first sex reassignment surgery, which highlights the unfortunate circumstances he is in. To quote Raju, I quote, "My sole source of comfort are my two guard dogs, who people tend to fear. Despite my wounds slowly healing, I still feel vulnerable. Every night, men arrive in vehicles and call out my name, but they're afraid to enter my hut because of my dogs. I sit in the darkness, clutching my sickle and holding the mouth of my dog to prevent it from barking, while the other dog barks at the intruders outside. If they discover my presence in the hut, they will force me into forest and subject me to whatever they desire." Unquote. According to Raju, he was subjected to severe physical abuse whenever he resisted being taken to secluded areas for sexual encounters. Due to frequent coercion, he ultimately felt that submission was the only option available to him. The sexual violence which Raju had to undergo on a daily basis is justified by perpetrators because of his non-conforming gender identity as an intersex person in a heteropatriarchal society. All basic rights ensured to a human being through constitutional practices and policies are infringed in his case. The justification of oppression and abuse found in the institutional structures like caste and heteronormativity delegitimize his suffering. It turns livability, which is a basic need of human beings, into unattainable luxury for people who are bound to occupy the margins where they constantly negotiate and conflict with oppressive power regimes. His tribal caste and intersex gender identity curb him from being qualified as a human, which thereby limits him from becoming a right-bearing citizen. As Baxi points out, universality alienates human rights discourses from lived experiences of culturally constituted humanness. In the backdrop of forced biopolitical and medical interventions to correct the sexual identity to fit one person into the binary of man and woman, the medical intervention in Raju's case was his necessity. Due to the unbearable pain he experiences every month during his menstrual cycle, surgery was deemed to be sole solution for his relief. In an effort to alleviate the menstrual cycle and painful cramps, he decided to have his uterus removed, but doctors cautioned him against the dangers of such a procedure. Instead, they recommended sex reassignment surgery to transition to a female. The narrative poses pertinent questions about Raju's agency, which was disregarded in taking a decision about his surgery. His words, I quote, "It was only after the procedure I realized where they have done surgery in my body," I unquote, reveals the fact that he was uninformed about the details of the surgery. Moreover, his condition and pain worsened after his first surgery. His ears were pierced without his consent in order to put a earring. They wanted to pierce his nose as well, but he resisted. From this we come to know that others were overtly desperate than Raju to make him a woman. This highlights the infringement of human rights occurring at various levels, ranging from the decision-making phase to the medical inefficiency, which resulted in failed sex reassignment surgery. The memoir is marked by a persistent sense of unbearable pain, particularly during urination after his first surgery, as well as anxiety about the potential failure of the second surgery. Additionally, Raju struggles with mental health challenges related to his inability to fully accept his own transformation into a woman. All he wanted was to get rid of the pain. Due to lack of support systems, he was forced to resort to begging as a means of relieving himself from starvation and poverty. This was mainly because he was unable to pursue any physically demanding jobs following his first surgery. He saves money for the second surgery from whatever little he gets from begging. It complicates the notion of human rights seen in liberal right discourses, which assume the promise that all human beings, irrespective of their history, will universally be able to enjoy the fruits that of market, equality, human rights, privacy, property, democracy, etc., as quoted by Baxi in Future of Human Rights. This narrative problematizes the perception of human rights as something granted by the government and bureaucracy through various establishments such as constitution. And I should also stress that India is the largest democracy in the world. The reasons why ingrained manifestation of human rights and democracy such as India through constitutional rights doesn't reach those whose lives are characterized by intersections of multidimensional precarity can be addressed through conceptualization of critical human rights realism situated in the sites of struggle and resistance of subjects. Raju, who doesn't own human rights as a resource to interpret his circumstances and resist violation, is considered as unworthy of being bearer of human rights. Upendra Baxi. A handed down notion of human right fails to address power structures like caste system that legitimizes suffering, while the birthplace of human rights is in resistance, in the sites of resistance and struggle, where self-respect and dignity are denied to human beings like Raju. Such an idea of critical human rights realism arises from the context-sensitive sites which question the power structures that decide conditions of intelligibility and livability of human beings within the immediate socio-cultural circumstances. Such a grassroots movement illustrates the inadequacy of existing human rights paradigms to ensure livability. The paper argues for a politics for human rights, which is defined as, I quote, a new form of sensibility arising from the responsiveness to the tortured and tormented voices of the violated, unquote, Upendra Baxi, rather than institutions such as state, which is considered as a benevolent provider of rights. Raju died a few years after the publication of this memoir. This specific memoir is documentation which has a power to determine the future of human rights in democratic India, which is essentially undemocratic, to quote B.R. Ambedkar's words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Gupta. It was a very thought-provoking and insightful presentation. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Okay, thank you once again. Let me introduce you to our next presenter, Dr. Esra ÜNLÜ ÇİMEN. Dr. ÇİMEN is a research assistant at the Department of Western Languages and Literatures at Çankırı Karatekin University. She completed her PhD on English drama at Ankara University. Her research interests include Renaissance English drama, 18th and 20th century English drama, and contemporary English drama. And she will be and her presentation is entitled Women on the Margins of Legal Discourse, Nina Raine's Consent. Dr. ÇİMEN, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the introduction. Let me share my screen. Okay. Nina Raine is a contemporary English playwright who explores women's contentious relation with law in her fourth play, Consent, premiered at the National Theatre in April 2017. The play focuses on the marital problems of two middle-class couples, Kitty and Edward and Rachel and Jake. While Edward, Rachel, and Jake are lawyers, Kitty is not currently working as she has given birth to her first baby, Leo. Whereas Kitty and Rachel want to divorce their husbands for domestic problems such as adultery and marital rape, Gail is a working-class woman and a victim of rape who cannot properly defend herself at court because of lack of legal support. At the end of the play, as a result of the difficulties they face in legal procedures, Rachel forgives Jake, and it is implied that Kitty will be reconciled with Edward. Gail, on the other hand, commits suicide since she loses the case, which displays that regardless of class, social and economic status, women are at a disadvantageous position in legal matters in patriarchal societies. Thus, this presentation argues that the challenges these women face in their legal processes complicate the issue of consent beyond the mere scope of sexuality, creating a dramatic space where, within the context of feminist politics, the Gramscian concepts of hegemony and consent can be analyzed to draw attention to women's forced subjugation in legal issues under patriarchal norms. As common in naturalist aesthetics, the play opens with a scene in the sitting room of Kitty and Edward's new home, where Rachel and Jake have come to see the newborn baby. During the visit, the lawyers talk about the cases they have recently been taking. While Jake's case is about pensioners, Rachel's latest case is about the murder of a girl by her ex-boyfriend for sexual motives. Similarly, Edward defends her clients against the accusations of rape in two different cases, which showcases the frequency of sexual assaults against women in the society. In scene 2, Gail meets Tim, another lawyer, who is going to ask her some questions about the details of the assault. As the dialogue between them reveals, instead of providing Gail with a strong defense at court, Tim appears to be on the side of the rapist. Are you my lawyer? Strictly speaking, I am not your lawyer, no. Who are you then? I am the lawyer for the Crown's case. But I am the one it happened to. I know it did. So who is my lawyer? You don't actually have a lawyer, but it happened to me. I know it did, but technically you are a witness. The case is against Mr. Taylor. Obviously, Tim is not interested in Gail's personal struggle to seek justice for herself. While Gail does not have a lawyer to defend herself properly and is devoid of a basic human rights, Mr. Taylor, the rapist, has one, Edward, who claims to Gail's shock that Gail consented to have sexual intercourse with him. This could evidently be explored under the Gramscian concepts of hegemony and consent within a feminist framework. Hegemony derives from the Greek hegemon, which means leader, prominent power, or dominant state or person, and is widely used to denote political dominance. Italian Marxist thinker Antonio Gramsci adopted the term in his prison notebooks to theorize what is known today as soft power, power which maintains its authority without violent coercion. The civil society reproduces its hegemony by ensuring that the mass of the population spontaneously consents to the general direction that the ruling group imposes on them through its intellectuals who shape philosophy, art, science, knowledge, education, and media, that is, through ideologies. Within the context of the play, it is possible to argue that the prejudice of the male legal authorities against believing in Gail's claims reflects the hegemonic perception of women as second-class subjects. Gail says that the rape took place on the day of her little sister's funeral, and she was in bits when she went to bed at 3 a.m. Tim does not allow her to express any more details, and without offering any help or suggestions, tells her to say these things in her own words to the court members. When she wants to reveal more details she did not include in her written statement, Tim does not listen to her, saying that she cannot tell him anything she did not mention in the statement before. Such technical difficulties show that law is not impartial. On the contrary, it works in order to protect men and their interests. In scene 3, Kitty, Edward, Jake, Tim, and Zara, an actress who is performing as Medea, are in the sitting room and talk about ancient Greek tragedies. Edward comments that the characters in Greek tragedies are vain men who live for their morals, while Tim thinks that they are plays in which women go mad. A reference to Medea is meaningful for the play because it is a revenge tragedy, a genre which generally displays the failure of legal processes in literary works. As Harry Cassian announces, the revengers in revenge tragedies are victims of malice, injustice, treachery, grief, unstable values, and deprivations of power or status, and therefore they are after equality. Dunn similarly argues these plays basically tell the stories of ordinary characters who have lost their trust in the institutions which are supposed to defy the status quo and protect the citizens' rights. As it is well known, Medea is the daughter of King Aeetes of Colchis, but leaves her hometown to live with Jason in Corinth, Greece. The play mainly portrays Medea's rage against her husband for arranging to marry Gilius, the daughter of King Creon. Since there is no law to prevent the marriage and protect Medea, she has to tackle with the issue on her own and resorts to violent ways. As legal redress is not possible for her, murder becomes her way of achieving justice for herself. First, she poisons Gilius and Creon, then she kills her own children, as it is what will destroy Jason the most. The motif of Medea in this sense offers a further perspective over the general lack of justice for women in Rand's play by highlighting the ever-presence of widespread injustices imposed on women through ages. Soon, Tim delivers that he is going to move into another house because he believes that his home is haunted by a female ghost for a while, and he has talked to a psychic to help him. The presence of a ghost is also a component of revenge tragedies, as in Hamlet or the Spanish tragedy. In Hamlet, for instance, the ghost of Hamlet's father appears to him and waits to be avenged for being killed by his brother. In the Spanish tragedy, the ghost of Don Andrea, who was unfairly killed in battle, watches the play and sees his revenge taken. In a similar way, the presence of the ghost, which is only visible to Tim, suggests that someone has been injured or exposed to some kind of injustice by him. In scene 4, Edward, as the lawyer of the accused, cross-examines Gale and implies that it was Gale who asked Mr. Taylor to stay with her in her room. However, Gale points to the fact that it was rape, not consensual intercourse. During the examination, Edward adds Gale saw her psychotherapist a few days before the event, and the psychotherapist says she is mostly quite sad and fed up with her life. Edward here implies she is paranoid, that is, she imagines things. Apparently, he wants to use her emotions to make her in case. In scene 9, when all friends are in Kitty and Edward's home, Gale comes in and sees that her lawyer team and the lawyer of Mr. Taylor are friends. Gale understands the reason why she was not allowed to declare at court that Mr. Taylor was already on bail for physical assault on another woman. Interestingly, while Mr. Taylor's violent tendencies are not included in his case with Gale, her psychotherapies are what made her lose the case with her rapist, showcasing how the legal system works through a rigid gender bias. In Act 2, Scene 2, it is found out that Rachel betrayed Jake with Ellen to teach him a lesson. Like Medea destroying her family for revenge, adultery is Rachel's way of taking revenge on her husband. Since she knows that legal procedures will take too much time and her husband as a lawyer will do everything to take the custody of the children, like Medea, she takes vengeance in her own way. Therefore, the play can be read as a contemporary revenge tragedy, which shows that women are still at a disadvantageous position in legal processes. Edward says Kitty has betrayed him with Tim, and now she wants to divorce him for marital rape, which he claims was sex. When Rachel asks him, "Did you ask her consent?" he replies, "Oh, for God's sake, of course not. She is my..." Obviously, he means that as Kitty is his wife, he can have control on her body. Soon, however, he accepts that it was technically a rape. In Act 2, Scene 3, Kitty talks to Laura, a lawyer, about her decision to divorce and informs her that Edward has prepared a 60-page document about her hormonal and emotional situation and postpartum depression. Laura explains they cannot use rape against Edward to take the child's custody since it is not regarded as violence against the child. And as a lawyer, she confesses, the divorce system doesn't give much of a feeling of justice being done. That is why people take justice into their hands, in a way justifying Kitty and Rachel's ways of taking revenge on their husbands. At the end of the play, Edward implores Kitty to forgive him. Kitty is hesitant, and meanwhile, the ghost of Gail is watching them, which suggests that justice is not established for her. Rachel's decision not to divorce and Kitty's possible reconciliation with her husband shows how the consent of women is ensured at all costs to maintain patriarchal hegemony. Namely, as Turner says, subordinated groups consent as they are persuaded that it will serve their interests. As story comments, hegemony is the result of negotiations between dominant and subordinate groups. It is a process marked by both resistance and incorporation. In the case of Kitty and Rachel, it is possible to claim that rather than living as widows, they prefer to live as married women since it will be easier for them in a society in which being a wife is regarded as the normal, ideal way for women to live. In Kitty's case, her consent to maintaining her marriage also has an economic motivation since she is financially dependent on Edward. Consenting to continuing their marriages, they reproduce patriarchal hegemony. It is only Gail who does not want to consent to the hegemony of the male-oriented legal system, but she has to pay the cost and commit suicide. To conclude, the play draws attention to the prevalence of rape in contemporary society. Coincidentally, in the October of the same year, when the play was first reproduced, the Me Too movement started on social media to point to the sexual assaults against women. Victims all over the world share their experiences and raise their voices against patriarchy. As the play shows, women from different social and economic classes are made to consent to living according to the dominant ideologies of the society, ensuring the maintenance of hegemony in sexual and legal matters. The play depicts the patriarchal system and its hegemonic impositions are so entrenched that social position or economic freedom is not enough for women to disregard social norms and go beyond them. Therefore, rather than individual struggles, the play suggests that a collective awakening might be a more functional solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. ÇİMEN, for your wonderful presentation. I would like to turn to the audience. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I guess not. Thank you so much, Dr. ÇİMEN, for your participation and for joining us today. I would like to introduce you to our next speaker, Dr. Artemis PAPAILIA. Dr. Artemis PAPAILIA holds a PhD in children's literature from the Democratic University of Thrace. Currently, she works as an adjunct professor of children's literature at Democratic University of Thrace. Her scientific reflections focus mainly on theoretical approaches to children's literature on issues of meaning-making strategies and reader response theories. Dr. PAPAILIA.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. 1 minute to share my screen. It's saying that host disabled participant screen sharing.
I think you can share it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, my today's presentation has a title, Visual Representation of Children with Disabilities in Contemporary Picture Books for Children. Undoubtedly, each one of us possesses a unique identity shaped by various factors, including the social milieu we belong to. The term different encompasses several categories, such as the non-religious, foreigners, people of the opposite sex, individuals with disabilities, and minorities in society. Children's literature can play a pivotal role in promoting acceptance and respect for diversity, although it is influenced by the contemporary society and its trends. Children's literature strives to keep up with the changing times and offer innovative solutions that challenge prejudices and stereotypes. Given the above, I became very curious about how children's literature portrays people with disabilities and the concept also of disabilities. How do authors tackle the subject of disability and make it accessible to children? What is their stance and how do they depict it? How do they handle its disability and what solutions do they offer? And lastly, who is their target audience and what is the underlying ideology they aim to convey? The total space of children's literature is a genre that goes beyond simply being literature written for children. It is aesthetically justified literary texts that allow children to experience the artistic phenomenon of art and literature. So the aim is to develop the necessary skills for children's growth and development without explicitly mentioning education or pedagogy. Of course, children's literature differs from adult literature in complexity and degree, rather than genre. For example, it offers the same pleasure as adult literature, but with simple language, form, and expression of ideas. The author's writing often operates within a framework of collective ideology. As Holly Dahlia notes, a significant portion of the book, it is not solely authored by the writer, but by the world in which the writer resides. In the case of children's literature, the author is not merely a carrier of his own ideas, but of the ideas and values that permit his shared world. The ways in which a writer narrates a story can serve as a vehicle for conveying ideology. A writer may subtly communicate his thoughts and attitudes through his choice of plot, characters, and perspective. Even seemingly innocuous details can communicate powerful messages that reflect the author's beliefs. Therefore, it is essential for authors of children's literature to be mindful of the messages their stories convey. While artistic freedom is important, authors have a responsibility to ensure that their writing aligns with the values they wish to promote. Now about picture books. Picture books, they form a distinct category within the wider field of children's literature. They refer to books where the story is a product of the collaboration of both text and image. The relationship between image and speech in illustrated children's book is very significant because the creative coexistence between text and image has a positive effect on a child's aesthetic nature. In our daily lives, then, we tend to differentiate between the known and the unknown, our own and the foreign. These divisions are fundamental standards of orientation and evaluation of reality, and they are therefore important in the construction and meaning and evaluation of social identity. The definition of father as foreign is related to the organization of society. However, the definition of father has broadened to include categories of people who differ from the common characteristics of the majority and therefore constitute minorities. These minorities can include also people that are physically or mentally disabled. From a pedagogical perspective, we can say that we can distinguish between three types of father in children's literature: the disadvantaged model, the similar, and the gifted other. The disadvantaged type is prevalent in children's literature and reinforces prejudices against them as inferior. This approach portrays the other as a problem to be solved, rather than a member of society. In contrast, the portrayal of a similar other emphasizes their relativity, facilitating acceptance of diversity. This approach shows that the other is not fundamentally different from the reader, but rather that diversity exists amongst all people in the world. Finally, projecting a gifted other can challenge established ideologies by showing that someone different can possess skills and talents between those of the majority. I'm glad to say that in the mid-70s, disabled people and their organizations began to challenge the medical-centric model of disability, which saw disability as a personal health problem that needed to be cured or fixed. So, in the next years, the term disabled or special needs is considered inadequate as it perpetuates stereotypes and is replaced now by the term persons with disabilities. Thankfully, many authors and advocates have begun to promote a different approach, one that focuses on the social needs of people with disabilities. This approach is known as a social model and recognizes that disability is a product of social practices of isolation and exclusion, rather than an inherent defect or disadvantage. The books that I'm going to analyze mostly adopt the social model, emphasizing the importance of accommodating the social needs of people with disabilities and promoting their full inclusion in society. The first book is He by Poulakis with illustrations by Papatsaroukas that was published in 2006. The story revolves around the character of He, one of the 75 baby turtles born to Miss Penelope. Despite looking no different than his siblings, he gradually sets himself apart with his unique perspective on the world around him. He struggles to be understood by those around him, but his sister Vagu is the only one who attempts to understand him. When Vagu sees the world through his eyes, she realizes that he perceives the world in a special and beautiful way. The story follows his journey from birth to the moment when society accepts him from his uniqueness. The book He takes a unique approach to the relationship between text and images, as the illustrator presents a different perspective on things that the world themselves do. The reader is invited to see the story from the point of view of the main character with autism, encouraging empathy and understanding. Also, the use of a turtle as the main character is an apt parallel that as the cell represents a closed world with its own way of perceiving and managing things. So the book emphasizes that the problem is not the disability of individuals with autism, but the lack of understanding and communication from those around them. The next book is Argyro Loves, and tells the story of a girl named Argyro who lives an ordinary life like any other child of her age. The book's title is a representation of a hero's character as she loves and enjoys every moment of her life, despite the challenges she faces. The story is narrated in the third person by an observer who looks at our hero from across the street, providing an external focus on our hero's life. The book aims to showcase that despite our hero's disabilities, she is no different from other children of her age. Our hero's disability does not limit her from enjoying life, having fun, and laughing with her friends. The book highlights the importance of having people who support and love those with disabilities, as it can make all the difference in their lives. It emphasizes that despite the difference and challenges faced by those with disabilities, they should be treated as equal members of society and be given the opportunity to enjoy life to the fullest. The text and imaginary hero loves work together to support the book's message about disability. The reader is shown snapshots of her hero's lives, seemingly just like any other child, without any hint of disability. This illusion is only dispelled in the final image, where our hero is seen in a wheelchair. The author's choice to address the reader in the last sentence of the book is significant by stating that our hero is a child like you. The author is inviting the reader to identify with our hero and see himself in her. Our next book is the story of Letters Dance, where Elisa, a young girl with dyslexia, loves to dance but struggles with reading because the letters on the page dance and move around. The story begins with Elisa feeling embarrassed and self-conscious about her difficulties with reading. Throughout the story, Elisa faces a self-esteem problem, feeling embarrassed and unable to read as fast as the other children. Moreover, she seems to receive indifference from the surroundings and even racism, but in an indirect way. No one seems to care if she succeeds or not. The confused images in Elisa's notebooks are appearing continuously behind the main illustration in reverse letters and numbers. This visual representation helps readers understand how dyslexia can make reading and writing difficult. One of the strengths of Letters Dance is how it portrays the emotional experience of dyslexia, particularly the frustration and lack of self-esteem that the children with dyslexia often feel. The author starts the story by stating what Elisa cannot do, but eventually comes down to what she can do, connecting dancing, something she loves, with reading, something she dislikes and finds difficult to follow. Our last book is Friends Like Lantern, which tells the story of Ismini and George, who, although they do not know each other, follow the same daily routine of going to school by bus, they meet. The two children's paths finally cross when their buses stop next to each other due to a red light, which leads to a non-verbal communication between them. This communication gradually develops into a strong relationship that does not see any barriers or difference. One day, during an educational trip, Ismini learns that George is deaf and mute, but this does not affect their friendship. The book portrays Ismini as a child who prefers to be alone, and even when someone tries to approach her, she disapproves. In contrast, George seems to be more open and sociable. Although there is no direct allusion to George's disability, the book presents disability as an everyday situation that should be incorporated into our reality. And now the conclusions. I would like to say that in general, that children's literature plays a significant role in promoting diversity, equality, and understanding among readers. When it comes to books that address disability, certain elements can be found in many of them. The feeling of inferiority on the part of the disabled person, loneliness, and suspicion from society are some of these. Through the depiction of characters with disabilities, children's literature encourages readers to judge and draw conclusions based on individual qualities rather than on stereotypes. By presenting disabled characters who manage to find their place in society and balance their challenges with their positive qualities, These books offer readers a different perspective on disability. They show that disabled individuals are not inferior, foreign, strange, or different, but that they are people who are worth getting to know and accept them. Thank you very much.
Dr. Papailia, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions or comments? Thank you so much once again for this very enjoyable presentation.
I just wanted to share my appreciation with Professor Artemis. I also teach children's literature, and I think this is a great topic, which I haven't included yet in my presentations, but thank you very much for motivating me and inspiring me to include picture books for children with disabilities. I think that's a great topic, and also we should start with children, of course, but I think picture books like this should be also created for adults, because it is the adults who create so many prejudices and differences.
Yes, exactly, dear Vesna. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, our next presenter is Mr. Siva. He's a research scholar at the Gandhigram Rural Institute, and his research areas include postmodern literatures, literary theory and criticism, Dalit literary studies, and cultural studies. And his presentation is titled The Resilience of the Untouchables, Dalit Literature and the Struggle for Human Rights. Mr. Siva, you may have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for the introduction. Dear Chair, I am unable to share the screen now. Can you help me?
I think you can share your screen now.
No, madam, I can't able to share the screen.
I think we're experiencing a little technical difficulty.
Ma'am, I could not share my screen.
Would you like to do your presentation 15 minutes later? In the meantime, you can fix the issue?
No, ma'am, I can present without the PPT. It's no problem.
Okay, then. All right. Then we will take your presentation after this one. All right.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Then our next presenter is Dr. Selin ŞENCAN.
Could you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you.
I can present them without PPT. I can do it. Yes, can I present now?
Yeah, sure. If you're ready, you can present right now.
Yeah. Thank you. Good evening, dear all. Thank you for the chair for the introduction. So my title of the presentation is The Resilience of Untouchables, Dalit Literature and the Struggle for Human Rights. So the main aim of this article is to explore the intersection of Dalit literature and the human rights by focusing on the ways in which Dalit writers have used literature to express and advocate for the writers as marginalized individuals. So as a literary genre, Dalit literature produced by a number of Dalit community in India who historically regarded as untouchable and subjected to systematic discrimination and violence. Through a close analysis of select works of the literature, this article highlights how the genre has become a platform for promoting human rights discourse and challenging caste-based oppression. This article also discusses the challenges faced by Dalit writers, including censorship, and limited access to mainstream publishing platforms. Ultimately, the article argues that the voice of Dalit literature has been instrumental in advancing the cause of human rights and social justice in India and beyond. So in this article, I'm not going to analyze a particular work of art, rather than it is kind of an outlook, overall outlook, how Dalit being oppressed in Indian caste-ridden society. So my presentation is broken into 6 parts. They are number 1, introduction, historical background, in which I'm going to talk about origin and development of caste system in India, the emergence of Dalit consciousness and Dalit literature, the role of Dalit writers in shaping the discourse of Dalit rights, and key themes in Dalit literature, impact of Dalit literature, challenges and opportunities, and of course the conclusion. I start with the introduction, in which I'm going to talk about the little bit of the historical background of Dalit literature. Dalit literature as a genre, it emerged as a genre in the late part of 20th century as a response to the caste-based discrimination and oppression that has been prevalent in India for centuries. This literature is characterized by its focus on lived experience of Dalits, their marginalization and struggle for equality and justice. Despite the legal abolishment of caste system in India, the social hierarchy and discrimination continue to affect the lives of Dalits in various ways. Here are some struggles faced by Dalits in India. Number 1, the measure of Dalits discrimination and prejudice. Dalit face discrimination prejudice in various forms, including social exclusion, economic exploitation, and denial of basic human rights. They are often subjected to physical and verbal abuse, social bygones, and restriction on their movements and access to public resources. And violence and atrocities. Dalits have been faced physical violence and atrocities, including rape, murder, and other forms of abuse. These incidents often go unreported or not prosecuted, leading to culture of impunity and fear. To illustrate this, the violence, the atrocities on Dalits, a few weeks ago, one of the North state in India, where Dalit boy who participated in marathon, where the upper caste people who pull down in and bring it out of this competition, because the upper caste people do not want to champion of Dalit, so they don't want to do that. So this kind of violence happening every now and then. And caste-based gender and intersectionality. Dalit women face additional layers of discrimination based on their gender and intersectionality. They are often subjected to sexual violence, forced labor, and other forms of abuse, both within their communities and outside of them. These struggles faced by Dalits in India are complex and deeply ingrained in the country's social fabric. Then I'm going to talk about historical background, in which I'm going to talk about the origin and the development of caste system. So the one of the oldest and complex social system India got. India, based on Hindu mythology or Hindu religion, based on people divided in 4 kind of people. The Hindus believe that the god is Brahma. So the people who born from head, they're known as Brahmins, and the hands from Kshatriyas and Vaishyas and Sudras. These are the 4 major divisions in India. And other people on the out of the caste, they are called as Dalits. So they are not allowed in public sphere. It's kind of an enclosed class system. That is how Dr. Ambedkar calls it. And next, I'm going to talk about the emergence of Dalit consciousness and Dalit literature. Dalit consciousness refers to awareness and empowerment of Dalit community to assert their identity, dignity, and rights as citizens of India. Dalit literature, on the other hand, refers to the literature written by Dalits that highlights their experiences, struggles, and aspirations. Ambedkar believed that the Dalit community needed to develop a sense of self-respect and self-identity in order to challenge the oppressive caste system. We saw the emergence of Dalit literature as a crucial tool in this process of empowerment. And another thinker and writer, Sharan Kumar Limbale, who wrote a book named Towards Aesthetic Literature, where he talks about the Dalit consciousness. He says that the Dalit conscious, what he tries to say is, Dalit conscious makes slave conscious of their slavery. So within which they have to come out of the slavery attitude, which perpetuated by Hindu religion. Another theorist, political theorist and professor, Gopal Guru, who argues that Dalit consciousness is not about asserting their new identity, but also about challenging the dominant cultural and social norms that have oppressed the community for centuries. He sees Dalit literature as a form of resistance against these norms and as a way for the Dalit community to assert their own voice and agency. The role of Dalit writers in shaping the discourse of Dalit rights. So Dalit writers have played a significant role in shaping the discourse of Dalit rights. One of the key contributors of Dalit writers has been to bring to light the experience of Dalits which were previously overlooked and ignored in mainstream literature. By writing about their experience of discrimination and oppression, Dalit writers have helped to challenge the dominant narratives and highlight the need for social justice and inequality. Dalit writers have also played a role creating sense of identity and community among Dalits. By writing about shared experience of caste-based discrimination, they have helped to create a sense of solidarity and belonging among Dalits, who may otherwise feel isolated and marginalized. Again, the theorist Gopal Guru argues that Dalit literature is an important source of knowledge about the experience of Dalits and can help challenge dominant narratives and that perpetuate caste-based inequalities. Guru argues that Dalit literature allows for a reimagining of Dalit subject, who are often depicted as powerless and victimized. And yet another thinker and scholar, Anubhama Rao, argues that Dalit literature is not just a representation of Dalit experiences, but also an active intervention in the political and social struggles of Dalits. Rao argues that Dalit literature challenges the dominant discourses by exposing the power relations that underlie them and by presenting alternative visions of society. And next thing I'm going to talk about the key themes in Dalit literature. There are four, I found that there are four fundamental themes that are found in Dalit literature. They are discrimination and marginalization of Dalits, struggles for social and political rights, critics of Hinduism and caste system, Dalit women's experiences of oppression and resistance. Here I want to explain one of the themes which is very important, critique of Hinduism and caste system. This is a very fundamental and very vital theme of that found in every Dalit literature. So particularly, I would like to illustrate for this the autobiography written by Sharan Kumar Limbale's The Outcast. Originally it is written in Marathi, Akramashi. Later it was translated into English. It is called The Outcast, where he boldly critiques the Hinduism, which within the Hinduism, he attacked the caste system. Even God's culture attacks caste. Once upon a time, the narrator called Sharan Kumar, he went to a temple where he denied to access the temple premises, where he writes, I quote, God discriminates between man and man. He makes one man rich and other poor. One is high caste, other untouchable. What kind of God is this that makes human beings hate each other? We are all supposed to be children of God. Then why are we considered untouchable? We don't approve this God, nor this religion, nor this country, because they ostracize us. Why are we ostracized? Why are we kept away from the other human beings? Why are we kept out our own selves? Why this discrimination between one human being and another? After all, isn't everybody blood's red? So you keep on questioning the social system, the value system of the Hinduism. So that value system of Hinduism, which doesn't allow the untouchables to enjoy the public sphere. They always want to Dalits subordinated and subordinate. That is what the most of Dalit literature emphasizes, the critics of Hinduism and caste system, because only Hinduism, even Ambedkar said that Hinduism is born with the inequality. That is the reason why the people chosen another religion. At the end of Ambedkar's life, he is also been chosen Buddhism, because in Hinduism we cannot expect the equality, the egalitarianism. And next thing I'm going to talk about impact of the literature and social and political consciousness. The literature has given a platform to the rights to express their experiences and has created awareness among wider public for injustice faced by the community. The political impact of the literature has been equally significant. It has led to the emergence of the Dalit political movement and has helped in the formation of Dalit identity politics. Dalit literature also played a key role in raising awareness about the caste system and the impact of Indian society. By highlighting the caste-based discrimination and violence faced by Dalits in this literature, as explained to expose the deep-rooted inequalities and injustice that exist within the Indian society. Furthermore, the Dalit literature has been instrumental in mobilizing the Dalit community and building a sense of collective identity and consciousness. By sharing their stories and experiences, authors have helped to create a sense of solidarity and shared struggle among Dalits, have inspired many organized to fight their rights. And next thing, the role of Dalit writers in advancing the cause of Dalit rights. Dalit literature has helped in creating a sense of Dalit identity and community. It has provided a platform for Dalits to articulate their experiences, aspirations, and struggles that have enabled them to create a shared consciousness and a collective identity. Moreover, Dalit literature has contributed to the broader discourse on social justice and human rights in India. It has highlighted the interconnectedness of different forms of oppression and has called for intersectional approach to social justice. Thus, Dalit writers have played a crucial role in advancing the cause of Dalit rights by challenging dominant narratives, giving voice to the marginalized, creating a sense of community and identity, and contributing to the broader discourse of social justice. Challenges and opportunities. The challenges faced by Dalit writers, the impact of censorship. One of the most significant challenges faced by Dalit writers is censorship. Many of the works have been banned and censored by the Indian government or the dominant caste system, feel threatened by the critique of caste system and their advocacy for social justice. For example, in 2017, the professor and the writer and the political thinker Kanchalaya, who published a book, Why I Am Not Hindu, and Post-Hindu India. The two books were banned in Delhi University in political science department because he vehemently critiqued the Hinduism. So that is the reason why the Hindu fundamentalists who banned this kind of books. And yet another example I would like to quote, in 2021, again, the Delhi University, the Department of English, they banned or they omit the syllabus of the paper called Women's Writing There, in which they dropped the Maiswada Devi's Draupadi and the writings of Bama and Sunita Rani. Both are from Tamil writers. So they replaced by the upper caste writer. So this is how the writers faces the challenge and the censorship by the prestigious institutions, where the fundamentalists had create their own views. So they did want to publish or portray the books which are condemn Hinduism. The impact of censorship on Dalit literature has been significant, as stifled the creativity and prevented writers from expressing their ideas freely. It has also prevented readers from accessing important perspectives on caste-based discrimination and social inequality. Writers are often targeted because their work challenges traditional social hierarchies and dominant narratives of Indian society. For yet another example, in 2016, the University of Delhi removed, it's already quoted, and another one example. Similarly, in 2019, again, a Dalit writer named Arish, is from Malayalam writer, faced backlash and censorship for his novel Misha. In English, it is called Mustache. It's published recently. The novel explores the life of Dalit women and the challenges she faces in Indian society. After the novel was serialized in Malayalam newspaper, right-wing groups accused Arish of insulting Hinduism and threatened violence against him. As a result, the newspaper stopped publishing the novel. The Arish was forced to withdraw it from publication. Next thing I would like to discuss the role of mainstream publishers and literary festivals in promoting Dalit literature. Historically, Dalit literature has been marginalized and underrepresented in mainstream publishing and literary festivals. However, in recent years, there has been a growing recognition of the importance of Dalit literature voices in the literary world. Mainstream publishers can play a crucial role in promoting Dalit literature by publishing and promoting works by Dalit authors. Here are some examples of mainstream publishers and literary festivals promoting Dalit literature. Navayana Publishing, who is significantly contributing and come out the Dalit literary writings, and Jaipur Literary Festival, HarperCollins India, Gola Goda Art Festival, Varnam Art Festival, and even the Oxford Publishing also played a significant role to publish Dalit writings. And I would like to make a conclusion here. In conclusion, the resilience of Dalit community is evident in their literature and their ongoing struggle for human rights. Through their literary works, Dalit writers have brought attention to systematic discrimination and violence faced by Dalit community and have challenged the dominant narrative of the caste hierarchy of India. By highlighting the experience and perspective of the marginalized Dalit, has not only given voice to the oppressed, but also contributed to a larger conversation on social justice and equality. By and large, Dalit literature is a powerful tool in the struggle for human rights, as it brings attention to the pervasive discrimination faced by Dalits and it challenges the oppressive caste system. It provides a voice to historically silenced community and empowers them to demand their rights and dignity. So this brings me end of my presentation. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Mr. Siva. Does anybody have questions or comments? If you do, please feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, thank you once again, Mr. Siva, for joining us today.
Thank you, Chair.
Today's last presentation is by Dr. Selin ŞENCAN and is titled, Is Posthumanism a Necessity to Justify Human Rights? Dr. Selin ŞENCAN is an assistant professor at Istanbul Topkapı University. She will be a visiting postdoctoral scholar at Texas State University in the upcoming academic year. She graduated from Ege University from English Literature Department. Her PhD thesis is an interdisciplinary study on climate change and philosophy, and her major areas of interest are trauma studies, posthumanism and literature, postmodern British fictions, cartography, and spatial studies. Dr. Selin ŞENCAN, I'll hand over this virtual floor to you.
Hello, everyone, and my pleasure to be here. I send my warm regards to all the participants, and I take this moment to thank the organizing committee for having us here and for organizing such fascinating event. Okay, I'll share my slide with you. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Before starting my talk, I will just quote from some of the famous post-human scholars. Kerry Wolf believes that it is not as if we have a choice about the coming post-humanism. It is already upon us. And Francesco Ferrando believes that humans have always been post-human. And Kevin Logrondo states that humans have never really been autonomous entities, but rather have been environment. Look at the Renaissance humanism first. As you see in the picture, the portrait of the Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci, Renaissance period and Renaissance humanism, it had a belief in the uniqueness and dignity and value of human life. And this form of thought was dominant until 20th century. So the human was always male, and he was always white and Western and European. Human always was rational, owner of land and property, and we had class and hierarchy in humanism. So it was anthropocentric, meaning that human was in the center. But with post-humanism, with its multivocal, and it includes multiplicity in itself, we have got many colors, we have got many forms. So it provides a new definition, a new answer for the question of what it means to be a human. So in post-humanism, the concept of humanity, actually, it is non-hierarchical. So it is rhizomatic, and it is not famous author, Tony Davis, and his
Dr. ŞENCAN, I'm so sorry for interrupting. We can't hear you clearly. I think there's a problem with your connection. Is there any way you can connect to another Wi-Fi or another?
Maybe it's better now. Professor, you can turn on your microphone.
Hi, can you hear me? I just got disconnected. Is it okay now?
Yes, it's much better now.
Okay. So I'll go on. We had Tony Davis, and I was quoting from his book that all humanism until now have been imperial. They speak of the human in the accents and the interests of a class, sex, race, and genome. So it is impossible to think of a crime that hasn't been committed in the name of humanity. So when we consider post-humanism and human subjects, let's say, are understood as the idea of distinctive human subject as a separate form, as separate from the non-human world.
Professor, it's happening again. I think there's an ongoing problem with your connection. Maybe you can try logging off and logging in on your phone, on your mobile connection. That would probably be more reliable, perhaps. Let's wait for a few moments. I'm sure she's going to be back.
Yes, hello again, Dr.
Hello
Şencan.
again. This is the third attempt, and I think that this time will be a successful one.
John, if it happens again, you can log in on your phone.
Yes, I tried this one. I'm just logging with my phone's internet, not the house internet. Okay, thank you. So I'm just passing some parts to save the time. So a post-human thinking doesn't necessarily abandon the liberal humanist, but rather presents such individuals as embodied social beings of a particular kind. And literature as an art form can therefore be employed for a post-human critic of the human and for reimagining the idea of a speaking human self or subject. So the human individual or person can certainly be seen as one of the constitutive mythologies of Western modernity. This mythology has had a fundamental role in shaping the increasingly contested concept of a legal and social human subject, also as the subject of human rights, based on the knowing subject and its manifestations through power relations in advanced capitalism. According to, excuse my pronunciation, Upendra Baki, the idea of the human right to development as it is formulated in international law is closely tied to contemporary process of global capitalism. In this system, kind of macroeconomic policies stand dictated by undemocratic and unaccountable international and regional financial institutions and multilateral treaty frameworks. So, as it's a starting point, a post-humanist approach contests the humanist image of man as a self-regulating, rational animal endowed with the powers of reason and language, which continues to instigate the perpetration of familiar forms of injustice, including death, killing, and threat of extinction, or multiple species, and we have got a famous scholar, Rosie Braidotti. Braidotti and other post-humanist theorists have based their critique of the idea of human subject as a kind of philosophical, social, and legal entity on its unacknowledged foundation in the universal value of Eurocentric assumptions about man and its unrecognized biases when it comes to class, race, gender, sexual orientations, age, and able-bodiedness. So this kind of human subject, Anna Greer believes that reflects hierarchies foundational to European rationalism, where the anthropos of Anthropocene is in a very real sense the kind of, European. I will skip the part of Anthropocene and we'll go to Rosie Braidotti. Rosie Braidotti is the writer of the book, The Post-Human, and in her book, she believes that the binary opposition between the given and the constructed is currently being replaced by a kind of non-dualistic understanding of nature-culture interaction by the help of post-humanism. So I'm quoting from her. In my view, the latter is associated to and supported by a kind of monistic philosophy which rejects dualism, especially the opposition of nature and culture, and stressed instead the self-organizing or kind of autobiotic force of living matter. So the boundaries between the categories of the natural and the culture have been displaced and to a large extent blurred by the effects of scientific and technological advances. Then in her book, she talks about the famous movements, especially in France, that actually they were foundation of human rights, the modern human rights we have now. France occupies a very special position in the genealogy of anti-humanist critical theory. French intellectuals continue, according to enjoy a very high status, especially in comparison with the wasteland that was post-war Germany, hence the huge international reputation of Sartre and Beauvoir. So we have got Beauvoir, Lucy Rigori, Michel Foucault, and Frantz Fanon, who were actually pioneers of feminism, post-structuralism, and post-colonialism. And then Braidotti talks about, anti-anthropocentrism, and she believes that we should defend a kind of vital materialism that identifies the whole of the universe as one infinite and indivisible substance. Life is a property not of individual entities, but rather a property of the substance as a whole. So she writes, there is a direct connection between monism, the great unity of all matter, and post-anthropocentrism as a general frame of reference for contemporary subjectivity. Okay, she proposes Zoe as a utopia for post-humanism. I will skip this part. If we have time, I will go back and talk about Zoe. But today I include one poem by an Iranian poet, Sohrab Sepehri. The name of poem is Water. It is a famous contemporary poem in Persian literature. I will read the first part of the poem. Sohrab Sepehri believes that we shouldn't muddy the water. We shouldn't make the water dirty. A pigeon may drink it down the road, or in a faraway grove, a starling may bath, or in the village, a jug may be filled. We shouldn't muddy the water. This running water may feed a poplar and wash away, sadness from a heavy heart. It goes on like this, but from this poem, we can say that Sepehri's poem presents and at the same time critiques the human individual as a distinct subjectivity, the stance observer of the world. This poem's setting is rural, and it focuses on the ecological, environment. Yet the participants, the many characters in the poem, present in its formation. So it ranges from animals to humans, and the place is constituted by relations rather than senses. This is what Braidotti describes as post-human assemblages. So Saperi's approach is based on profound ethical imperatives for tackling challenges that affect human life, in this case, water pollution. This care for nature is within human agency, and it is a phenomena that is not in a big scale like climate change. Saperi is inviting everybody to not waste the water and not make it dirty. So this is something that we can do. It is within human agency. It is not in a big scale like air pollution or something else. So poetry and post-human philosophy here share a sense of resistance to instrumentality. This poetry is questioning of language, its curiosity of human and non-human life, and its suspicion of authority are, in the 21st century, articulated within a framework of preoccupied with non-human agency, the role of technology in shaping humans and their environments, and an awareness of the scale effects of human behavior. So consequently, in poetry, we have got post-human subjectivity that emerges as material, social, ethical, and these stuff at the same time. So the different approaches described in Saperi's poem illustrate some of the key aspects informing post-human thought that Rosie Braidotti has described. Braidotti calls for foregrounding of ethically accountable post-human knowing subjects, less the strict individuals in possession of a distinct human consciousness than as operating within categories of power relations. She argues that the subjects of this exchange compose a relational community defined as a nomadic and transversal assemblage. So non-human life as water is a defined resource which is not distinct from human experience. The poet's voice suggests we shouldn't muddy the water. Saperi presents the lodging corporations' use of water as a natural part of the same system in which the human species through evolution has adapted a place as the food chain's top banana. So the dominance of natural elements in Sohrab Saperi's poetry is quite evident. Thus, natural elements such as flowers, nightingales, trees, clouds, winds are all found in poetries of those poets, okay? I will conclude Saperi's poetry in terms of post-humanism again. So we see the poet taking up ways of being in the world that are far different from the human. The poet is of what such life means. It must mean something, especially to the animals themselves. Poetry in this post-human configuration is not illuminating and expressing one's experience. Rather, poetry is opening up to a non-human phenomenology of wonder beyond fact, reason, and mimetic description. So in the poem, water, the element of water, acts as a network that links bones and correspondences. What appears as an overly rich thriving is merely illusionary excess, since abundance provides a kind of ecologically valuable biodiversity. So taking a post-humanist turn would mean recognizing diversity in itself, not for human utility. Thank you very much for listening to me.
So much, Dr. ŞENCAN, for your presentation. I will turn to the audience. Does anyone have any questions or comments? If you do, please feel free to unmute yourself, your microphone.
I have a quick question. Thank you. I found your talk fascinating. And I was just curious, since tragically we had to skip so much, would you mind going back to what you wanted to say about Zoe?
Okay, yeah, sure. We have got Zoe, the utopia of Rosie Braidotti. Braidotti actually defines Zoe as a kind of non-human life, as opposed to the human bios to be regarded as the ruling principle to be adopted. Zoe is the dynamic, self-organizing structure of life itself, of which anthropos or bias is just a thin segment. Braidotti points to a Zoe-centric worldview. Instead of having a kind of anthropocentric, we have got Zoe-centric worldview. A worldview that values generic life in all of its iterations as the central tenet of post-anthropocentric turn, in that it effectively decenters bias as the measure of all things. A post-human theory of the subjective, therefore, could emerge as an empirical project that aims at experimenting with what contemporary biotechnologically mediated bodies are capable of doing. And in order to build Zoe, Braidotti believes that we should do three things. In her opinion, we should become animal, then become earth, and then become machine. You're familiar probably with Deleuze and Guattari. Becoming animal and becoming machine are two famous, concepts of Deleuze and Guattari. And Braidotti adds becoming earth. So becoming animal means that animals have long been reduced to metaphoric indicators of human virtues. In this way, non-human animals become problematically reduced to symbols for human attributes and thus violently reinterpreted through human norms. So she believes that we should make a kind of new mode to describe and have a relationship with animals. So she believes that we need a change. And this change should be a system of representation that matches the complexity of contemporary non-human animals and their proximity to humans. Non-human animals can no longer be used as symbols to reaffirm human centrality, but must instead be approached in a kind of no-literal mode as entities dependent of human construct. And by becoming earth, she argues that contemporary monism implies a notion of vital and self-organizing matter, as well as non-human definition of life as Zoe, or a dynamic and generative force. So a post-human notion of subjectivity has more to do with recognition of an inner species goal of keeping the planet as the only known habitable environment for all known iterations of Zoe alive. And by becoming machine, again, we have got the move beyond symbolism. The machine can no longer be understood as a metaphor for humanity, but it must be conceived as an object on its own. By becoming animal, by becoming earth and becoming machine, we actually, subvert the concept of self and other. And in Zoe, we do not have that binary of self and other. So a Zoe-centric turn provides a new set of rhetorical tools that help to identify the exploitation of other bodies through the uneven dynamic of power in the globalized economy. Zoe-centric rhetoric then emerges as a force for both positive and negative progress. And Braidotti gives an example for what is both positive and negative, and she gives the example of climate change, that the attention to the issue of climate change can be both positive and negative. So the rhetoric surrounding issues like climate change often speak of disappearing nature in the face of civilizational expansion, thus problematically reasserting the dichotomy between nature and culture. This rhetoric produced in the human subject a deep anxiety about the rapid disappearance or destruction of nature, as well as a misguided understanding of nature as something separate from humanity. So the public morality is unable to fully internalize the notion that we are literally a part of nature and that its morality is inherently tethered to our own. So what is needed, argues Braidotti, is a more sophisticated understanding of this in post-human turn, such that progress can be made toward more sustainable and empathic public policy. Yeah, this was a short and brief definition of Zoe and how to build Zoe-centric life. Thank you for listening again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Şencan, and thank you very much, Professor James Dawes, for your suggestions so that we could listen to the part we have missed. Again, I will ask the audience, do you have any questions or comments? Okay, we have all come away from this event with a lot more knowledge on the intersection of human rights and literature. And I hope we can bring what we have learned back to each of our classrooms in the future. Our third session will be tomorrow, starting at 6 p.m. Istanbul time, with Professor James Dawes as our keynote speaker and as the moderator, Istanbul Topkapı Üniversity's own Professor Dr. Ferma Lekesizalın. I would like to thank all of the participants today joining us from different parts of the world. Thank you so much and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you all tomorrow.
See you guys tomorrow. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.